Today, we are going to be looking at the best NFL player from each state. There are only two qualifications for this video. One, you only qualify in the state you were born in, and two, you had to be on an active roster last season. Alabama has a lot of options. CJ Mosley, of course, Zadarius Smith, James Bradbury, even Marlon Humphrey. But the guy I'm going with, and I will not accept any other answer, is Quinnen Williams. Quinnen finished the 2022 season with 12 sacks, 55 tackles, 35 of them solo, 4 passes defense, 2 forced fumbles, and a sick fumble recovery, which alone should put him as the best option. And get this, he rushes from the interior. 12 sacks as a defensive tackle is unheard of. Bad news to all the Alaskans out there. There's nobody in the NFL right now from Alaska, and there hasn't been since 2015. So Arizona is actually a pretty easy choice. Honorable mentions, of course, to Christian Kirk and Cameron Jordan, but the player I chose was Mark Andrews. While yes, it's true, Andrews regressed in the 2022 season, it likely was a result of inconsistent quarterback play and lingering injuries. Let's not forget that only a year ago, Mark Andrews had almost 1,400 yards and 9 touchdowns as a tight end. When healthy and playing with Lamar, it's hard to argue that he's not one of the best in the league. Arkansas is home to a couple underrated studs. They, of course, have Treylon Burks. They got Hunter Henry. But the guy that I think is the best player from Arkansas is Dre Greenlaw. Anybody who watched a 49ers game this year knows exactly how important Dre Greenlaw is to the 49ers defense. Greenlaw is very unique as a linebacker, as arguably the best thing he does, perhaps in the whole league, is guard receivers. And of course, he had one of the hardest headlines the whole season. California, as you can imagine, is very difficult to decide as there's a gazillion players from California. Among these is Elijah Vera Tucker, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Vita Vea, DJ Reed, Joe Mixon, Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers, but I decided to go with Davante Adams. Davante was 3rd in the league in yards with 1,516. He was 1st in the league in receiving touchdowns with 14. He was a first-team All-Pro, averaged a career-high 15.2 yards per catch. And I don't think I need to say a lot here. I think we all know how good Davante Adams is. Colorado is eventually a layup, but I do want to give an honorable mention to Calais Campbell, who is still a stud, but ultimately the easy pick is Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey is one of those players that could just take over a game at any point. And I don't know about you guys, but I think San Francisco has been a great fit for McCaffrey. Not to mention his game against the Rams, where he threw for a touchdown, ran for a touchdown, and caught a touchdown. McCaffrey is one of the best in the league when healthy, and he seems to have found a great fit in the Bay. Connecticut's kind of a weird one. I would have loved to give it to Byron Jones, but, he's retired now. So I think we're going to go ahead and give it to Zach Allen. Not a lot of star power in Connecticut, but Allen had a respectable 7 hurries, 12 knockdowns, 25 pressures, and 5.5 sacks. Not bad. Delaware's another state with no real superstar. I am a Deron Harmon fan, but I think the player I go with here is Brian O'Neill. Brian O'Neill actually did start all 16 games for Minnesota this year. He had 0 holding calls, and he was actually a Pro Bowler a short while ago. Florida is tough. Florida has 4 players who are arguably at the top of their position. Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Nick Bosa, and Pat Surtain. I personally did eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and I got Derrick Henry, so that's who I'm gonna go with, but again, I'm cool with picking all these people. Derrick Henry finished 2nd in rushing yards, 2nd in rushing touchdowns. He also caught for almost 400 yards, putting him right around the 2,000 yard mark, which he's already amassed in his career with just rushing yards in 2020. Georgia is a state that has quite a lot of picks. You got Nick Chubb, Bradley Chubb, Alvin Kamara, of course Darius Slay, but the pick here is Tyreek Hill. Tyreek finished 2nd in receptions, 2nd in yards. He finished with 119 receptions for 1,710 yards and 7 touchdowns. He also ran for a touchdown and is known to everyone as the fastest player in the league and the hardest to tackle in open space. Hawaii seems pretty obvious, and when you think of this state, you probably think of this guy, but honorable mentions to DeForest Buckner and Tyson Alualu. But of course, the pick is Tua Tagovailoa. Tua finished the year with 3,548 yards and 25 touchdowns despite his injuries during the season. He also finished 3rd in the NFL in QBR, and his roughly 3-to-1 touchdown interception ratio is nothing to scoff at. Tua actually finished 9th in MVP voting this year. Idaho is a state with, I'll be nice and call it mediocrity. I literally have no idea what to do with Idaho, so Bryce Callahan, Leighton Vander Esch, who actually had a solid bounce-back season, but I guess I'm going with Taysom Hill. Taysom is such a hard player to rank for me because he doesn't actually fit the mold of any position, right? But I think that's what makes him so dangerous. This year, Taysom ran for 575 and 7 touchdowns, caught another 77 with 2 touchdowns, and on top of that, threw for 240 yards and 2 touchdowns. Taysom is a very unique, special player, and I think he deserves the top rank here. Illinois is another state with just a lot of okay players. Cole Kmet is a guy who I think has potential to be a star, and I think he'll grow with Fields. Corey Davis is a guy who I think can find his footing soon. Laken Tomlinson is someone that I would have given this to last year, but he kind of regressed with no warning. Adoree Jackson's pretty solid, but I think the representative is Kirk Cousins. I know people love to hate on Kirk, but I think he's a solid quarterback. He finished last season with 4,547 yards and 29 touchdowns. He also led the Vikings to a 13-4 record. Don't sleep on Kirk. Indiana is a state with 4 guys who I think are solid top-tier players. We got Jeremy Chin, we got Jesse Bates III, and even Terry McLaurin. But the guy that I think stands out the most is Zach Martin. Zach Martin is the proud owner of my favorite stat. Zach Martin actually has more Pro Bowl selections with 7 than he has holding penalties in his 8-year career with only 5. On a team with a lot of movement, one thing has remained constant, and that is Zach Martin, who will continue to be one of the best interior linemen in the league. Iowa is a state with a trifecta of studs for some reason. Tristan Wirfs is from Iowa, TJ Hawkinson is from Iowa, and of course, Joe Burrow is from Iowa. Burrow had 4,475 yards last season and threw for 35 touchdowns. Burrow also came up just short of a second Super Bowl appearance in as many years. I think many fans consider Joe Burrow to already be one of the best in the league, and frankly, I agree with them. Kansas is the state of big fellas, Mike Pennell, Jordan Phillips, and my pick, Malik Collins. Malik has been pretty consistent throughout his 7-year career thus far, and last season he picked up another 37 tackles with 3.5 sacks. He also had an additional 9 tackles for loss, 2 pass deflections, and 10 quarterback hits. Malik was a solid player last year for a team who went 3-13-1. Kentucky has a couple solid players with Damian Harris, Devontae Parker, and even Jedrick Wills. But I think their best player right now is Montez Sweat. Montez was quietly a very important part of the Commanders' defense last season. With 8 sacks, 2 pass deflections, and 28 quarterback hits, Sweat proved himself as a solid defensive end last season. Louisiana is the state of wide receivers. While dudes like ETN, Derek Stingley, and even Dak Prescott come from the Lou, the real medalists here are bronze medal to CeeDee Lamb, and as crazy as it sounds, a silver medal to Jamar Chase. And that is, of course, because the gold medal goes to Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson finished first with 128 receptions, first with 1,809 yards, and added an additional 8 touchdowns. In just his first 3 seasons, Jefferson has already tallied 4,825 yards and 25 touchdowns. No one in the history of the NFL has more receiving yards in their first 3 seasons than Justin Jefferson. Maine finally has a player back in the NFL, and that is Nate Davis. Davis has appeared in 42 games in the last 3 seasons and has taken 98% of the snaps in the games he's appeared in. He's been a solid guard for the Titans and only has 5 holding calls in the last 4 seasons. Maryland is a state that has 2 players who stand out amongst the crowd, and they so happen to be related. Honorable mention to Darren Waller real quick, but as I'm sure you've guessed, Trayvon Diggs and Stephon Diggs are both from Maryland. It's hard to pick which one, and even though he's had me blocked on Instagram, and then I wrote a diss track on him, and then I held up the sign at the Pro Bowl trying to squash the beef, I'll say Stephon Diggs is the best player from Maryland. Stephon, since joining Buffalo, has amassed 4,189 yards and 29 touchdowns. He's been a Pro Bowler all 3 years and even led the league in receptions and receiving yards in his first year with the team. I actually, no offense to my Bostonians, was expecting way more star power out of Massachusetts. I myself am a Pat Ricard fan, but I can't give it to a fullback. So really it's going to come down to Freiermuth or Wilkins. I'm going with Christian Wilkins because I think his importance to the Dolphins is really overlooked. Last season, he led defensive linemen in solo tackles and assists as well. Playing defensive tackle, this is unheard of. No one stuffs the run quite like Wilkins does. He had 16 tackles for losses last year, 7 quarterback hits, and added on 3.5 sacks as well. Additionally, Wilkins had 6 pass deflections and forced 2 fumbles. I'm going to be 100% biased on this pick, but I don't even think it's biased because I think he's the best player from Michigan. Honorable mentions to Matthew Judon and Aiden Hutchinson, who I really think are 2 of the best rushers in the league, but I'm absolutely going with my boy Sauce Gardner. The Defensive Rookie of the Year gave up just 54 yards in man coverage across 17 games. That's a whopping 3.17 yards allowed per game. And I know all the sites say that he gave up a touchdown, but it's simply not true. It was a missed pickup in zone coverage, meaning Sauce has given up 0 touchdowns in the pros and in college. And in the wise words of me, he's so good at football. Minnesota has hometown hero Adam Thielen, and they got Trey Lance, who has a lot of potential, but definitely the pick here is Frank Ragnow. Frank is a 2-time All-Pro at the center position and a 2-time Pro Bowler as well. Frank has a total of just 5 penalties in the last 3 seasons, and he has participated in 100% of the snaps in 2020 and 99% of the snaps in 2022. When he's healthy, he's proven himself to be a top center in the league. Mississippi has Demario Davis, longtime underrated stud. Fletcher Cox, same thing can be said about him. It frankly comes down to DK Metcalf and AJ Brown. I gave the edge to AJ Brown. AJ Brown is a 2-time Pro Bowler, and he finished last season with 88 receptions for 1,496 yards and 11 touchdowns. That ranked him 4th in yards and 3rd in touchdowns. AJ also had 6 catches for 96 yards and a touchdown in the Super Bowl, showing that he can perform in the big situations as well. Missouri is one that if you asked me last year, I would have never given you the same answer. Zeke is from Missouri, but he's not quite the player he was. Utah legend Devin Lloyd is from Missouri. But my pick is Foye Oluokun. Foye not only led the league in tackles this year, but he led the league in tackles last year as well. He had an absurd 97 solo tackles this year and was a pivotal player for the Jags defense this year. Montana, as you can imagine, is not flooded with NFL stars. In fact, there's only 3 from Montana who played last season. Lance McCutcheon, Troy Anderson, and my pick, Will Disley. Will has been a solid tight end for the Seahawks over the years, grabbing a career-high 349 yards last season. But Will Disley, of course, is known for his tremendous blocking ability. Nebraska's a gimme. Honorable mentions can go to Fant and Zerline, but the pick is pretty clearly Austin Eckler. Eckler had 1,637 total yards last season, as well as 18 total touchdowns. Averaging 5.3 yards per touch is absurd for a running back. And Eckler has proven to be one of, if not the best dual threat running back in the NFL. Now we got Nevada. Shout out to the hometown boys, Brandon Ayuk, Kyle Van Noy, and my former high school and college classmate Dalton Kincaid. But for real, the best player from Nevada is Ramondre Stevenson. Ramondre solidified himself as the top option for the Patriots this year as he eclipsed 1,000 yards for the first time, averaging 6.1 yards per carry. Too bad he went to Centennial. New Hampshire doesn't have a lot to see. Hunter Long and the pick Ryan Griffin. Griffin's had a solid 10-year career, bringing in 2,200 yards and 14 touchdowns. He's a very good blocking tight end, and he's had a pretty respectable career. New Jersey is tough. Minka Fitzpatrick is a stud, and it really comes down to Quentin Nelson and Jonathan Taylor. I think I'm going to go with Jonathan Taylor because I'm being slightly biased towards skill position in this video. Jonathan Taylor in his short career has already proven to be a workhorse running back. He's already amassed 3,800 yards and 33 touchdowns. This includes his 2021 campaign where he ran for 1,811 yards and 18 touchdowns. I'm expecting a bounce back year for him. Slim Pickens in New Mexico, Zach Gentry, Joey Sly, and I guess the pick is Colt McCoy. Colt is one of the better backup options in the league, and technically he could be the starting quarterback in week 1 depending on how Kyler Murray's doing. So, starting quarterback Colt McCoy repping New Mexico. From New York, we have the reliable Chandler Jones, AJ Terrell, but I think the pick is Saquon Barkley. Saquon had a bounce-back season where he rushed for 1,312 yards and 10 touchdowns, tacking on an extra 338 from the air, good enough to earn him a Pro Bowl selection this year, proving that when he's healthy, he's a force to be reckoned with. Fun fact, North Carolina actually has 22 more players than New York, which kind of shocked me. From North Carolina, though, we have Keenan Allen, Javonte Williams, Danny Dimes, Javon Hargrave, and for my pick, I went for Jair Alexander. Jair has shown that he is one of the best corners in the league, and this year he had 5 interceptions with 14 pass deflections. He also had 4 tackles for loss and earned a Pro Bowl nod and an All-Pro selection as well. North Dakota isn't hard. The pick is Connor McGovern, the Jets version though. Connor was a solid player for the Jets last year, appearing in 17 games and playing every single snap. He had 0 holding calls the entire season. McGovern has always been a solid player for the Jets, and he's the best that North Dakota has to offer. Next we have Ohio, which you can imagine is ridiculous. Denzel Ward, Marshawn Lattimore, Taylor Decker, Micah Hyde, Jason Kelsey, and as you can guess, the pick Travis Kelce. There was once a time where you could debate who the best tight end in the NFL was. those days are long gone. Travis Kelce is far and away the guy. He totaled a ridiculous 3,879 yards and 32 touchdowns over the last 3 seasons. He also holds multiple postseason records already and was, of course, a Pro Bowler and an All-Pro this season. Oklahoma has some under-the-radar picks. Tyler Lockett, Josh Jacobs, and the guy who I'm going to take, which might be unpopular, it's Creed Humphrey. In the last 2 seasons, Humphrey has already solidified himself as perhaps the top lineman in the NFL, and there are few run blockers in the league better than Humphrey. He has allowed no sacks and just 18 pressures all season. Oregon is a state for the sleepers. Jordan Poyer, Talanoa Hufanga, and of course, Justin Herbert's from Oregon. Herbert had 4,739 yards last year, good for second in the whole NFL. He also threw for 5,014 yards in the year before. In his 3 seasons in the NFL, Herbert's already thrown a ridiculous 94 touchdowns, and he also has 8 more rushing touchdowns. Pennsylvania, as you can imagine, is not particularly easy. Kyle Pitts, a lot of Penn State guys, Chris Godwin, Miles Sanders, and of course, the pick is Micah Parsons. In just 2 seasons, Parsons already has 26.5 sacks, 149 tackles, 33 of them for a loss, and a ridiculous 56 quarterback hits. He also finished second for Defensive Player of the Year 2 years in a row. He's a 2-time All-Pro, and frankly, he's already one of the best defensive players in the NFL. The only player from Rhode Island is Jets legend Kenny Yeboah. Kenny is primarily a special teams guy for the Jets, but don't let that fool you because him and James Morgan hooked up for a classic Hail Mary in this preseason game. South Carolina is a state full of campus heroes. You have your Clemson boys, Mike Williams, Hunter Renfrow, and an easy pick from a few years ago, DeAndre Hopkins. But now it's probably between the other South Carolina campus boys, Stephon Gilmore, and my pick, I went for Deebo Samuel. Deebo really exploded in 2021 with 1,700 scrimmage yards and 14 touchdowns. He earned an All-Pro first-team selection and a Pro Bowl as well. Last year he missed a couple games due to an injury, but he had close to 1,000 yards in just 12 games. Deebo is one of the most explosive players in the NFL, and I think he's the choice here for South Carolina. South Dakota really isn't a question. Riley Reeve can have an honorable mention, but the pick is clearly Dallas Goedert. Dallas in 12 games last year had 702 yards and 3 touchdowns as a tight end in a run-first offense. He tallied an additional 830 yards and 4 touchdowns the year before in just 14 games. Dallas is a crucial piece of the Philly offense, and he is a huge reason for its effectiveness. Tennessee has a bunch of up-and-coming talent. Kenneth Walker, T. Higgins. They have good old Jalen Ramsey as well. And I really struggled to choose here between these two. But honorable mention I gave to Tony Pollard. And the pick, I have Trevor Lawrence. I think T-Law was really impressive last year and made a huge step up from his game in his rookie year. Trevor threw for 4,100 yards and ran for an additional 239 with 30 total touchdowns. Lawrence even led the Jags back to the playoffs, and he was awarded with a Pro Bowl selection, and he actually finished 7th in MVP voting as well. And the powerhouse I'm sure a lot of you are waiting for, Texas has Jalen Waddle, Rashawn Slater, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Max Crosby, Mike Evans, Lane Johnson, Justin Tucker, Trent Williams, and Nick Bolton, just to name a few. But the pick is so obvious. It has to be Michael Clemens. Is that right, sir? Okay, obviously the pick is Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes had 5,250 yards and 41 touchdowns last year. He led his team to a Super Bowl win. He won MVP. He won Super Bowl MVP. He was first team All-Pro. He set several records already. He's made an argument for the Hall of Fame already in his 6-year career. The kid is gold. What more can you say? From the state of Utah, Julian Blackmon is a mention, but it's clearly between 2 guys. I want to give it to Garrett Bowles, but I think with the uncertainties, I'll go ahead and give the edge to Dalton Schultz. Schultz has been very solid the last 3 seasons for the Cowboys, grabbing 2,100 yards and 17 touchdowns. He's also been very reliable on the 12-yard curl on 3rd and 11 for Dak, grabbing 103 first downs in that span. His efforts also earned him a solid contract in Houston next year. Obviously, from Vermont, we got... Yeah, Vermont hasn't had anyone since 2001, so... From Virginia. Throw it on a dime, like I'll give a mention to Josh Allen, but my pick is Justin Simmons. Simmons has been a rock for the Broncos defense the last 4 years, earning 3 All-Pros and a Pro Bowl in that time frame. Justin, of course, led the NFL last year in interceptions with 6, and he also registered 19 pass deflections over the last 2 seasons. Washington really only has two notable players. They got Buda Baker, and then they have the easy pick here, which is Cooper Kupp. Kupp, as you guys know, is only the fourth player since the merger to lead the league in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns in the same year, and was named Super Bowl MVP. I know maybe recently people forgotten how dominant he was because of his injury last season, but let's not forget how he was arguably the best receiver in the NFL only 1 year ago. West Virginia is not a star-studded state, to say the least. Yo, that alliteration was kind of crazy. In fact, there's only 3 players in the league from West Virginia: Najee Johnson, Trayvon Wisco, and CJ Goodwin. I guess I'll give the edge to CJ Goodwin because everyone loves a good special teamer, and CJ has played 7 seasons in the league, so longevity is at least a good thing. Don't get me wrong though, Trayvon is a nasty blocker, and Najee's a Super Bowl champion. Wisconsin, of course, is home to 3 tremendous players: Ryan Ramczyk, and believe it or not, our runner-up is George Kittle, because obviously the pick here is TJ Watt. TJ, when healthy, is arguably the best defensive player in the league. In his last 2 fully healthy seasons, he has had a ridiculous 37.5 sacks and 44 tackles for loss and 80 quarterback hits. TJ is an unreal pass rusher, and I don't think there's any arguing that he's not the pick here for Wisconsin. And finally, our last state, Wyoming, which only has 3 players: Jacob Bobenmeyer, shout out to my long snappers, Logan Wilson, and the pick is Taven Bryan. Taven had a respectable 3 sacks and 26 tackles last year as a defensive tackle. He also had 2 tackles for loss and 6 quarterback hits. Taven is a solid rotational lineman who earned a contract with Indy this offseason. So there you have it, the best NFL player from each state. Let me know if you guys disagree with my picks, and let me know who you would have taken in the comments. Make sure you guys subscribe for more football content. I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Hope y'all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one.